Yeah.
Going into Alien Romulus, I was expecting an Alien movie very much in the Disney legacy sequel tradition of capturing the aesthetic of a classic movie, with lots of fan service and character callbacks, but ultimately not having anything original to say. And to some extent, that's exactly what Alien Romulus does. But it also goes in some really unexpected directions. It references stuff from past Alien movies that I didn't think the franchise would ever mention again, at least in the movies. And it offers some ideas that I, as a hardcore, long-time Alien fan, I'm still trying to digest 24 hours after seeing the film. Hey heroes, I'm Josh from Panels to Pixels, and these are my spoiler-free first impressions of Alien Romulus.
Are you sure you want to do this?
Alien Romulus is directed and co-written by Fede Alvarez and produced by Ridley Scott, the original Alien director, and also the director of a few other Alien movies that we don't really want to talk about. Or maybe we do. The film is set between 1979's Alien and 1986's Aliens, and follows a group of young space colonists attempting to escape the harsh working conditions of their home planet, then stumbling upon a disused Weyland-Yutani space station called Romulus and Remus, and I think you can probably guess what happens next. The opening of this movie is just phenomenal. In terms of setting a tone and just nailing that aesthetic of this universe, I was immediately in. Right from the beginning, you are seeing computer screens and hallways, and hearing the chitter-chatter of that glorious 70s retro-futurist technology. And you have this opening scene that I don't even want to spoil, even though it's in the first 5 minutes of the movie. But it's the connective tissue between the original Alien and this film, and it is just superb. It's really well shot, beautifully staged. It's got this big choral music that makes you kind of gasp and hold your breath. It's kind of Kubrickian in a 2001 A Space Odyssey way, or The Shining. But anyway, from there we meet our principal cast, headlined by Kaylee Spaney as protagonist Rain Carradine, and David Johnson as her adopted android brother, Andy. Their relationship is genuinely touching and sweet. She's an orphan whose father reprogrammed a synthetic to basically take care of her and tell her dad jokes. It's very cute. But she also protects him in a sisterly way, and he's kind of autistic coded in the slightly cliche way that a lot of fictional robots are. And if you've seen any Alien movie before, you'll know that synthetics are not always to be trusted, or at least can have fluctuating personalities, which allows Johnson to play multiple roles within this one role as Andy. He does a really great job. There's some very uncanny amygdala-triggering moments when he glitches or doesn't respond to things the way you'd expect a human to, much in the tradition of Ian Holm as Ash in Alien, or even Michael Fassbender as David in Prometheus. Kaylee Spaney is our young female hero, very much in the tradition of Sigourney Weaver's Ellen Ripley, and I think she does a solid job here. It's a much more modern, understated take on that final girl trope. She isn't screaming bloody murder or going big at any point, and I do wonder if a role like this needs a little more to become iconic. She almost gets lost in all the chaos by the end of the film. It's a funny thing because it's hard to tell in hindsight if Sigourney Weaver's performance as Ripley is now iconic because she is Hollywood megastar Sigourney Weaver, or was it just as powerful when she was, a relatively unknown actor? So while I wasn't blown away by Spaney's performance here, I'm interested to see how I'll feel about it in a few years as her career develops. I mean, I'm interested to know how I'll feel about this entire movie in a few years, to be honest. Although aesthetically, Alien Romulus is firmly in that late 70s, early 80s era, the movie features a lot more modern horror tropes and techniques than I was expecting. Although given the intended audience of a blockbuster horror movie like this, maybe that shouldn't have been a surprise to me. You have these very trailery scenes of characters shuffling backwards on their bums as facehuggers crawl at them from every direction, and the music is building up and going but I think it works though, ultimately. And just as Alien 3 and Resurrection are cemented in the 1990s with their grim dark edginess, I think Romulus will feel very 2020s one day, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now we've got to mention the production and the character design. All of the sets, the machinery, the spaceship dashboards, it all feels so tactile and dirty and authentic. And then of course there is the animatronic xenomorphs that were created specifically for this film. It's so good to see practical xenos again after Alien Covenant. There is one moment in Romulus where you see a dead xenomorph splayed out, almost crucified, and without spoiling it, it's got added significance in the context of the plot. And I haven't been able to get that image out of my head all day today. It's so good. The lighting and the use of colour is very effective in this movie as well. You've got these very beautiful, softly lit faces, and then lots of texture and shade in the backgrounds. This is very tactile, very old school, high standard filmmaking. Although I have to say, it's quite dark at times. People talk about how hard to see Aliens vs Predator Requiem is. Romulus isn't much brighter. I did find myself squinting quite a few times to see what was going on.
There's something in the water.
What do you mean there's something in the water?
I don't know, there's just something in the fucking water.
So interestingly, although this film owes mostly to Alien and Aliens, I think it's actually closer aesthetically to Alien 3. It's got some of that fiery furnace, orange light, and sweaty heat that you can almost feel radiating from the screen. And actually, what this movie is trying to do, which may or may not be to your taste, is be a kind of Alien compendium and bring in elements from every single Alien movie, even the bad ones, and then connect all of these quite disparate dots. There are huge plot points in Alien Romulus that rely heavily on movies that I never thought would be referenced in the franchise again. The final act of this movie is both mirroring the final act of one reviled Alien movie, while at the same time using the lore and the mechanics of another controversial Alien movie, and it's really genuinely surprising to me that they went there. It's also impossible to talk about this movie without talking about the influence of the 2014 game Alien Isolation. They're both set in that same time period between Alien and Aliens, both taking place on abandoned space stations. There are even direct nods to the emergency save points from Isolation in Romulus. But one of the most effective things borrowed from the game is the sound of the xenomorph stomping around the grated corridors and the instant panic that it brings. The sound design in this film is magnifique. Leading up to the release of this film, I watched and listened to a lot of interviews with director and co-writer Fede Alvarez, and it's clear how much this franchise means to him, and how he sees the merit in every single installment. So while Romulus has been marketed as a legacy sequel to Alien and Aliens, and certainly I remember people speculating at the beginning that it would be a kind of soft reboot, disregarding everything that came after Aliens, that's just not the case at all. It is a love letter to the entire Alien saga, prequels and all. So if you're not into that, maybe you won't enjoy this one as much. Fede Alvarez has received explicit support from Ridley Scott, and it appears that Scott was heavily involved as a producer, as a story consultant, and whatever else. His kind of influence is all over this. And in Alvarez, I'm reminded of Dave Filoni's role and relationship to Star Wars. First as a fan, then as George Lucas's protege working on animated shows like Clone Wars, and then finally as the custodian of Star Wars as this big Disney-owned legacy franchise. Alvarez treats Alien Resurrection, or Prometheus, with the same reverence as Filoni treats the Star Wars prequels, and both have made it their mission to legitimize and canonize even the most divisive elements of their respective mythologies. And look, I don't know what the future of the Alien franchise is at Disney and 20th Century Studios, but if Alvarez is hoping to be the guiding hand here, I think he would be a very safe choice. Now, whether the safe choice is necessarily the best choice, we'll come to that in a minute. Prior to directing Alien Romulus, Fede Alvarez cut his teeth on another horror soft reboot in 2013's Evil Dead, and then 2016's Don't Breathe. And you can definitely see him developing similar themes and techniques across these three movies. So I want to talk specifically about the way Alvarez builds tension. There's one scene in this movie in which some of the crew have to sneak silently and undetected through a corridor full of facehuggers. And it feels like the director taking all of that pin drop tension he had perfected with Don't Breathe and then showcasing it here. It's very tense. However, and this has to be my biggest criticism of the film, I don't think Alien Romulus knows when to back that tension off. That's a serious problem, and it got to the point for me when the movie still had 45 minutes to go, and I was suffering from something I'm going to call tension fatigue. Successful horror works by balancing tension and release. It's much like music, actually, and I'm not going to bore you with a music theory lesson here, but you have something called a key center, which is the pitch or chord that a song revolves around, and then you have all the other notes or chords in that song that stray away from that key center. And for the listener, consciously or unconsciously, you're always feeling that pull back to the key center. It's safe. It's what some musicians call home base. Tension and release. It's one of the tenets of interesting, colourful, textural music. A crunchy chord, and then a big sigh of relief when you get back to the home chord. In a horror movie, that big sigh of relief is especially cathartic, because you've just had all of this tension, your adrenaline is flowing, your heart's pumping out of your chest, and then just for a moment you're safe. If you were to chart the rising tension in a horror movie on a line graph, you'd see the overall tension trending upwards across the film's entire runtime. But within that, you'd see these little peaks and valleys, creating little pockets of decompression and allowing us, the audience, to reset our fear responses. Alien Romulus, for the most part, and especially after around the halfway mark, doesn't really do that. At a certain point, it's like here's a xenomorph, and here's another xenomorph, but what if there were 10 xenomorphs, and what if the ship crashed, or the artificial gravity failed, and what if everything is on fire, and what if this person dies, and then this person dies, and oh yeah, here's tons of facehuggers to fill any negative space left on the screen. It's just too much. You're getting bombarded with too much. You very quickly, or at least I did in this movie, you get numb to it. It's tension fatigue. I don't want to compare it to the original Alien because that might be one of the greatest uses of tension in the entire history of cinema, but you have these moments of decompression in that film between the crew where they get to a point of safety, or they're just able to discuss and reflect on the horror that is unfolding around them. But those interactions are missing in Romulus. It's just a lot of shouting at each other. We need to go here and do this. And then there's a xenomorph attack. Okay, we can't go that way. Let's go this way. Another xenomorph attack. And it just does that for like a solid back hour of the film. It's a serious problem, in my opinion, and it's the number one thing that got in the way of my enjoyment of this movie. I just felt exhausted by the end of it. So I mentioned a little while ago that Fede Alvarez is the safe choice for an Alien movie, and that can be a good or a bad thing. Even though Romulus goes in directions I definitely wasn't expecting, it's very much a legacy sequel riffing on what has come before. There are character callbacks, and even iconic lines returning, even though they really make no sense and are just there for the audience to go, oh, he said the thing, I'm something of a scientist myself. It's actually not dissimilar to 2022's Prey in that respect, but even that film did more to establish its own identity within the Predator franchise. Recently I made a video called Saying One Nice Thing About Every Alien and Predator Movie, in which I said that even though I don't love Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, I respect the big swings that they took. And a swing and a miss for me will always be preferable to just shooting fish in a barrel. But despite all of this, I think Alien Romulus is a very respectable Alien sequel. It's very competently and very lovingly made. It feels truly respectful of the franchise and its fans, in a way that shockingly few legacy sequels are. And it's an extremely enjoyable way to spend 2 hours in this universe. My last video contained my personal rankings of all of the Alien and Predator movies, so if you're curious after you watch that video, here is where Alien Romulus would slot in. I would place it just below Prometheus, although it's probably about on par with that movie and also Alien 3 for me. They're all kind of floating around in the middle of the league there. So look, for those of you who have seen Alien Romulus, let's have a discussion about it in the comments below. I haven't read many reviews yet, but I think it's going to be divisive amongst Alien fans. But let's keep the chat spoiler-free if possible. If you do want to check out my last video, Saying One Nice Thing About Every Alien and Predator Movie, you can do so by clicking the link on screen now, and I will see you over there.